Hello and welcome. This is the Bits vs. Bytes podcast. I'm your host, I'm Rijdt, and today with me is Tim van der Rijdt. He is Chief Business Officer at Mosa Meat. Welcome, Tim.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
No problem at all. Could you tell the listeners a little bit about your background and also how you got to work at Mosa Meat?
Right. I'm a marketeer by training, marketing communications. I started at a market research firm, which was a startup, a spin-off from the university. Then after about 6 years, I joined Google in the marketing team. First B2B marketing, Google's advertising products, but pretty quickly I moved to consumer marketing, where all the fun new stuff was happening. So I saw the launch of Chrome. We did Google Maps projects. I recently was launching Google Assistant and Google Home speakers across Northern Europe, which is the Benelux and the Nordics. And since August, I'm officially now at Mosa Meat, where we make meat.
Yeah, cool. What made you pick Mosa Meat? Because a lot of people would say, working at Google is like a dream, especially if you look in terms of companies. But why the choice for Mosa Meat?
Yeah, no, I agree. Google is often voted to be the best employer you can dream of, basically. And I must say, it's a fantastic work environment. It started for me in 2017. So I saw news articles about companies that offered solutions for any issues around meat. So producing meat in a different way without the climate impact, without having to kill an animal. And I know that when Silicon Valley picks up a new challenge, then things can move pretty fast. And I also remember that in 2013, there was a Dutch team from the Netherlands that actually presented this very first hamburger that was produced in this way. So real meat, but grown from animal cells instead of by slaughtering an animal. And I thought, wait a minute, if this now has Silicon Valley attention, where is the team now that produced that very first hamburger? So I got in touch with Professor Mark Post and Peter Verstraeten, who were part of that first team in 2013. I got in touch and just said, well, I want to see you super successful, not just because of the problems you're solving, but also I'm a bit of a tech chauvinist. If this started here in the Netherlands, then I would love to see this company take it to market and be successful. So I started helping them just on the side, from the train and some from the couch while watching Netflix. And that's basically how it started. And then secondly, of course, I've been at Google for a little over 10 years. When you're in a very comfortable position, of course, I've been thinking about what would be a next step for me personally. There's this, I'm not sure if you know the Japanese concept of ikigai.
Mm-hmm.
It's
yeah, but you can explain.
You've probably seen this Venn diagram that you're really in a good spot if you spend your time doing stuff you love, doing things you're good at, what you can get paid for, and what the world needs. So I read this article about the concept, and I was just preparing another personal development plan. So I thought, well, let's just fill that in. What do I love? What am I good at? What can I get paid for? What is something the world needs? And I found out that on what the world needs, I was filling in all these grand themes of climate change and when I mapped all these things to what I was spending time on, I didn't really spend time on those topics too much. So you can do two things. You can either then kick off projects within your current job, which I did. So, for example, with Google Home speakers, I didn't just focus on how do we sell as many as we can, but also what is an angle to this that the world needs. So with a Dutch project called Project Silver, we looked at can elderly people or seniors use smart speakers to be more independent, or to be more connected. So that's how I try to tweak my current job. But secondly, you can also look at external projects, and that's why when I then saw the news items from Silicon Valley about disrupting $1 trillion meat market, that's when I thought, wait, as a side project, I might just want to reach out to the team and see if I can just be of help there.
Yeah, that's interesting. What I want to get back on, because I think that's maybe interesting for a lot of people, is the kind of personal development plan that you did. So was that some like really structured thing that you really sat down and really thought it out and maybe put it on paper, or was it more in your head, like, okay, these are the things that I'm thinking about, this is what I want to do? How did you go about that?
Oh no, so at Google, everyone is encouraged to create a very concrete plan on paper, discuss it with your manager. Managers get trained to help you do that. And those plans usually involve not just what do you need to develop at work, which can probably often be just a list of just tasks that you have, but they also add the angle of what do you want to do in your personal life? Because a really realistic plan also incorporates, for example, if you're just, for example, having kids. When I have a daughter of 5 and a son who's 3. When you're in a very busy period personally and you want to focus on that, you might not want to go for an extra promotion, and these are things you need to balance, and that's fine, right? So to really be in a good place, your plan has to combine both personal and professional goals. So it's definitely something they focus on a lot. Google tends to treat their employees very well, but also lets them think about how do you keep growing, how do you develop yourself, and I think it's refreshing. Some people were putting in their personal development plan that they wanted to get rid of back pain, for example, or there's all kinds of things you can put in there. So yeah,
it could be very big dreams in that, right?
Yeah, it could be big and it could be small. So just taking the, if you come back to the back pain, if you want to do 30 minutes of really specific exercises, you could do it somewhere in your schedule throughout the week, or you could do it at the office. And the company then tries to accommodate corporate and personal goals.
Yeah, exactly. And the interesting thing is that to me, when I look at that, is that for me it's kind of always been normal to look at like the next step or the next thing that I want to do. But a lot of people, especially what you said, when you're in a comfortable position where you actually know I have a good job, I'm gonna get paid every month, I don't have to worry about that anymore, and I can live comfortably. Then usually people are like, okay, it's good like this, and I'm not going to think about new challenges anymore, or look at things that are very outside of my comfort zone. Because this, to get back to Mosa Meat, it is a big switch in the sense that it's a totally different thing, right? It's not a technological. Well, there is some technology involved, of course, creating the meat and stuff like that. But it's a different kind of business, right?
I totally agree.
Go ahead.
And for me, it's more that if you're in a privileged position, why not think about the best thing you can contribute? Because I feel super privileged for having been able to work at a company that really is invested in developing you as a person. And I'm not sure where I heard a quote, but there was some person saying, "What is the biggest challenge of your generation?" And then, if you have the answer, why aren't you spending all of your waking hours to solve that issue? That kind of resonated with me. It's a bit of the perspective of looking back, 20, 30 years in time, looking back and saying, what was the big challenge then? Why weren't you at Woodstock? Or why weren't you involved in this topic that we now see as so defining for that generation? And that's I think part of what I'm trying to do here.
Yeah, exactly. So, could you tell a little bit about what Mosa Meat actually does?
Yes, of course. Yeah. So we produce real meat. So not a, a meat alternative, or it's not plant based. It's really made out of real meat. So you probably know this, but meat is muscle and fat basically, and we produce that by just taking some cells, living cells from an animal, and you put them in water, nutrients, you give it warmth, and then they grow. That's what they do inside an animal, and that's what they do when you really nurture them. So these cells, it's the stem cells, they multiply. So that's an exponential. And once you have really a lot of these cells, they become muscle or they become fat, and then you have meat. So that's what we're doing.
Yeah. So that process has taken a lot. I think a lot of time and a lot of effort to get going. I know
Yes.
that actually Sergey Brin was one of the investors, right?
Yes. Originally, the project started with a Dutch man called Willem van Eelen. He was he was a scientist. He was the first that got together scientists, but also government funds and people from the meat industry. And in 2008, with government funding, this project started rolling, and our CSO and COO, Mark and Peter, were involved in that project. But after a while, when funding stopped, the team said, "Well, we still want to continue this, but um, they were looking for other ways to finance it." And at one point, Sergey's team actually found out about the research, and in a paper they described that it is possible to make meat this way. And Sergey just reached out and said, "Well, make it a reality. Just go and produce a hamburger."
Yeah.
And that's what basically set off this whole new industry. There's, I think, now for around 40, maybe 45 companies that actually grow either meat or fish or leather or milk or whatever from animal cells. It's called cellular agriculture. Um, by just taking that same principle. So in
Yeah.
2013, with that first hamburger, we showed that it was really possible, and we just cooked the burger. Had food critics taste it, and they said, "Well, it's unmistakably meat. It is the same thing. It's a bit dry because it didn't have fat. It was way too expensive because the first hamburger cost €250,000 to produce, and in the nutrients or the medium in which the meat was growing, there were still animal products used. So those three things we've been solving. So the cost has come down. We don't use the animal products anymore in producing it. Um, and we added fat and optimized taste.
Yeah, exactly. So, how does that? Because how does that process look like? So, do I have to imagine like people all in lab coats, like trying to grow meat in a lab, or is that something that's going to change over time as well, where it can be commercialized that much that anybody could actually buy this?
Yeah. So it when you're able to buy it, which can be much sooner than you think, it won't be produced in a lab. Um, it started with people in a lab because you need the microscopes to look at the cells and stuff like that. But when it's produced, it looks more like a brewery. So you have these large tanks basically with the water and nutrients and that are 37 degrees where these cells can multiply. And it probably looks more like what you know about the inside of a brewery.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's hard to imagine because everybody's
Yeah.
so used to kind of the if I can call it quote unquote the old way of
Yeah.
harvesting meat. If you can call it harvesting, it's just slaughtering an animal. But
Mhm.
and that's so fascinating to know because. Are these because you're growing meat, but are these kind of the same things that because there's a lot of talk about like growing cells or helping in some other way, not like the whole cloning stuff and stuff like that, but there's been a lot of talk about 3D printing organs and everything like that. Is that kind of the same techniques, or how should I see that?
Well, we're taking the most simple and most pure form to do this. So, for example, you take some cells, but we don't genetically modify them to grow any faster or to do anything differently. We just take cells as they are, and we kind of we nurture them. We fool them into thinking that they're still in a body, and the whole exponential growth is something that's baked into these cells. That's what they're designed to do.
Yeah.
So we try to keep it as simple as that. And yes, it opens up all kinds of maybe new ways to produce food. But I think the first step we want to take is just make exactly what we are eating in these vast quantities. Make the exact same thing at the same price or lower, but then without all the downsides. That's the purpose of the company. And yes, you can make all kinds of artsy. You also have craft beer. You could make all kinds of craft meat, maybe. But our first goal is to get this to scale.
Yeah, exactly.
If you talk about the meat consumption globally, we spend around $1.4 trillion per year on it, and meat alternatives like plant-based hamburgers. That total value at the moment is less than 1% of that market. So it's almost unimaginable how much of it we consume, and people will only move to cultivated meat when it's exactly the same. So there's enough challenge there. There's enough work for us cut out to get it to the right price, to exactly the same experience eating it. And after that, maybe all kinds of new models open up. But it starts with that first step.
Yeah, and how about because there's a lot of talk about meat and the environment and the kind of impact that it has on the environment as well. So how does that, when you look at this process, how would that solve that kind of problem, right? Because yeah, of course, you don't need to. Well, there's still going to be new cows and new whatever, but it's. Is it just because of the quantity of animals that you don't need anymore? How does it solve it?
Yeah, it's the quantity of animals. So with one tiny sample of cells, you can make 80,000 quarter pounders. And for traditional meats, you need to raise a cow for maybe 3 years. These cows are pretty inefficient in going from what they eat to becoming meat. They need to keep their body temperatures at a certain level. They drink, and so that's a long, slow process that you have to plan. But one of the biggest factors is that they also produce methane, which is they burp and they fart, and all the greenhouse gases associated with meat consumption are around 15%, 15, of all the greenhouse gases emitted globally. So it's a huge chunk, and methane especially is 20 times as effective as CO2 in retaining heat. So if you talk about these high volumes and about a very strong effect on actually warming or retaining heat within the atmosphere, then it's just basically one of the biggest things we can do in the fairly short term, in the next 2 to 5 years, to reduce that footprint. So you can look at it from very different angles. Some people don't eat meat because they don't want animals to live in confinement and be slaughtered. Some people don't eat meat because of the environmental impact. Even if you look at it from purely an economic perspective, it's just more efficient. Our way of producing meat is just more efficient than growing an animal. So there's different ways to look at the impact.
Do you think that because there's a lot of people that are vegetarians that do that because of the well-being of the animal and stuff like that, do you think their opinion would be maybe swayed by having this type of meat?
It could be. I'm mainly concerned with the people that really love meat and would not switch to anything else. I mean,
Mm.
I'm a meat eater. I love meat, and I also know all the downsides that are associated with meat. Right, so I had this kind of mental friction. I love it, but I also know it's not really good for me. And
Yeah,
then
the
what you
same
do?
thing.
Yeah, you eat meat.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, it's the same thing. For me, it's also a little bit of a cultural thing.
Of course,
I
yeah.
mean, I'm from the Western Balkans, so
Yeah,
meat is a really big part of the culture. Like,
of course.
it's just vegetarians almost don't exist. That's the thing.
No, no.
But that's really the case.
Yeah, it's there's different levels. Genetically, we've been eating this meat for about 500,000 years. Genetically, we are optimized to really taste really specific differences in meat and how it's prepared, and it's uh, uh, cultural, it's psychological. We really are, as a planet, we're hooked to meat, basically. So that's
Hmm.
a part of why it's hard to move away. And if you make the comparison to, for example, um, driving cars and emissions by cars, there was a time when we said, well, maybe we should all drive less. So maybe on Mondays we shouldn't be driving in our cars. But
Hmm.
it's really hard to do that at scale. Some people are maybe very altruistic and they want to they are able or they are willing to sacrifice um, for a greater good. Um, but it doesn't solve the problem for everyone, like at scale. So
Yeah.
driving a car less could be an option. Then there was a period when you could drive maybe a not so sexy kind of dull car that didn't have that much range. So you had the option of driving in a not so pleasant car, which is also a bit of
Yeah.
sacrifice. And then Tesla comes along and just builds a kick-ass car that kind of improves on any metric you can imagine and solves the problem in the meantime. And that's I think what we're working on at the moment. We don't want to compromise on um, the how much you enjoy meat. We don't want to compromise on how much or when you eat it. We just want to solve the problem of all the downsides that are associated with it. It needed some breakthrough technology, but we're there. It will happen over the next 2 years.
Yeah. So I think a lot of people would also like to know. Of course, we talked about the cells and how
Yeah.
you grow them. So
Mhm.
how do you actually get to those cells? Because that's also, of course, a thing. How do you even extract that from the animal?
Um, there's different procedures. You can do it with a hollow needle, or it's a vet, so it's a doctor that uses you just uh, an existing medical procedure. You can also make it a tiny incision, but we want to make it um, uh, as easy as possible for the animal. We're even looking at not even having to poke an animal, but use other ways to get the cells. Um, but it, it's something that the animal shouldn't actually notice.
Yeah.
That's the goal. You can also use meat from slaughtered material. So that's when you get into the territory of is it considered maybe halal or is it considered kosher? Um, for some types of meat, there's all kinds of rules on how the animal should be slaughtered.
Yeah.
And yeah, then you could also do it that way. So there's different ways to get to a couple of living cells.
Yeah, that's an interesting point because I didn't even think about that. But
Yeah,
there's a lot
there's all kinds of yeah.
yeah, there's a lot of religious rules that kind of say, okay, you need to slaughter an animal this and this way, and then it's considered right by the religion. But if you
Yeah.
don't slaughter the animal and you grow the cells, is that still within the rules? It's not something
The-
that they had in the rule book back then.
yeah.
When
No,
when
but
these books were made.
there's religious kind of committees that are actively looking into this. Um,
Hmm.
and we'll see. Our primary goal is make sure it happens, that it's available,
Yeah.
And then scale up as fast as possible. And yeah, we want to take along everyone, but we'll start with we'll start with the people that are a bit like you and me, who love
Yeah.
meat and know that that something needs to change.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's a big problem. At least from what you can hear from everyone, it is one of the biggest problems that needs to be solved, and that's the interesting thing to think about. For
Yep.
me, usually what gets a lot of people with kind of alternatives to meat is just the taste. As you said, we're kind of there's a funny story. I had a vegetarian burger once, and I didn't know it was a vegetarian burger until I ate it, and I was like, yeah, this seems off. I don't know why, but I can't really place in what kind of category of meat this falls, right? I was like, okay, what kind of animal is this? This is not an animal. You can actually taste that's really small kind of difference between that, and that's why a lot of people, I think, don't gravitate to that alternative yet, because it's just not the same. It's not the same kind of taste.
It's a bit of the uncanny valley. Well,
yeah.
It's it depends on how you eat it. In some dishes or in some burger builds, you don't taste that much of the meat itself. So it depends on how you use it, of course. But the beauty of how we're producing it is that you get all these processes that happen with animal protein. You get them for free. You don't have to mimic them. So where a lot of plant-based hamburgers need more than 20 different ingredients to mimic all the different things that happen when you put meat on the grill, it just happens here. So, for example, the whole Maillard response, so that the meat actually browns, and all the taste and the flavor that comes out, that just happens automatically because it is exactly the same meat down to the cellular level, the same type of sugars and protein and how they respond to being cooked. It's not something we have to make an analogy to or come close to. It's just something that happens because it is the same. So that's a bonus. It's just a free bonus for us.
Yeah, it's as you said, it's basically meat, but it's grown outside of the animal. That's the only like real different thing about it. So what I was interested about is what do you feel is kind of the biggest challenge that you have right now as a company? So what's the real challenge to is it to change people's minds, or is it to get the production better? What do you feel is the thing that you spend the most time on right now?
It's not per se changing people's minds. We get so much incoming questions on, can we please try it immediately?
I would like to try it. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. That's same here.
Yeah.
So there's even studies like in the Netherlands. I think in 2018 there was a survey. Almost 60% said yes, I want to try this. We are, really focusing on the product at the moment, getting the because there's just mainly two things that need to be perfect, which is price and taste. The taste is, we don't worry about that too much because it is exactly the same. And the price is something that needed to come down from $250,000 per hamburger to reasonable levels. So that's our big challenge at the moment. How do we get to a scalable process for a reasonable price? And that's step one, is cracking all the science, knowing everything about how these cells can be treated as good as possible. We need happy cells that do what they usually do. And then the second part is more a mechanical engineering kind of challenge, or a supply chain challenge. How do you design the factories? How do you design your supply chain? And you can buy ingredients in bulk. That will be that's the second wave of optimization of price.
Yeah, and that's the thing, because a lot of people will say, yeah, I can still get the like normal quote unquote meat for
Mm-hmm.
X amount of money, and that's still
Yeah.
like, I don't know, a third of the price, and everybody will
Mm-hmm.
still be like, okay, I'm still gonna buy that, because
Yeah, of
why would
course. Yeah,
I?
yeah,
You
yeah.
know,
Yeah. And
that's the that's the
that's
thing.
why we're laser focused on that, because
Yeah,
otherwise you still need to sacrifice, right? Then you're sacrificing, but then only in price.
yeah,
We want zero compromise on price, on taste, and on all the downsides that we're mitigating, from climate impact to animal welfare, or all the other. There's you know land use. You've seen the fires in the Amazon,
sure,
water
yeah,
use, which is kind of getting to interesting, challenging points. There's the resistance to antibiotics. So I think between half and 60-70% of all the world's antibiotics apparently is being used on animals for meat production.
mm,
Um, Doctors are already saying, like, this is definitely coming. Resistant superbugs. Um, so all these um, extra effects of making this shift in meat, um, yeah, does make
yeah.
it really interesting to wake up in the morning and go and do this stuff.
I can imagine. I can imagine,
Yeah,
because
yeah.
it's just what you're working on, one of the big challenges, and that's the cool thing.
Mm-hmm.
And I can imagine that that's what kind of drives you as well to do this kind
Definitely.
of thing.
Yes. Yeah.
So what do you, when we look into, because it's always hard to look into the future, of course, but
Mm-hmm.
when you look at that, what's kind of the, what would fulfill you in a sense that you would say, okay, we've actually done it. We've actually
Mm-hmm.
done the thing that we wanted to do. What do you, how do you see that? How do you see that working out?
Yeah. So on the fairly short term, I think within a year, probably mid 2020, we'll have this scalable hamburger. That will
Mm-hmm.
be a huge milestone for us, because that shows that at first it was a proof of concept. Now this is a reality. It's not science fiction anymore. It's really here. Um, in the slightly longer term, I'm really excited about all the other options that you can go into, steak or other types of meat, just broadening the portfolio of what you can make. And I think the ultimate validation would be that if you're in a supermarket, you have two exactly the same pieces of meat, and for one of those, an animal died, and there's this huge footprint and all other uh, um, downsides associated with it. And for the other piece of meat that's just not there, I think, and the choice isn't really that hard. And you could even think about, um, governments actually incentivizing the people then make that more sustainable choice. But
Yeah,
yeah, maybe that's something that I would love to see in the
yeah.
slightly longer future.
Yeah, the I can see, for example, that that governments will maybe tax those the like normal slaughtered meat more, just to incentivize people to pick the other choice, right?
Hmm.
If you already want to make that kind of change, you need to at least incentivize people to make the right choice.
Yeah.
Because just removing the option completely, I don't think would solve the
No, no, no.
problem immediately.
No, it will always be there. I mean,
Mm,
um, and if it's probably going to be at a higher price, as you say. But if you um, traditional meat will I think always be there. There are so many different types of how people consume uh, different parts of animals. You can't do away with that. Our biggest goal is not to remove all animals, but more start with reducing factory farming, because that's the
yeah.
at scale production process. That's where we basically treat animals as if they were a mini factory. If we could only remove those, then that would be fantastic. So there will be, if you see it as a pyramid, there will be probably still be top of the pyramid, which is maybe lower in volume, high in price, of traditional, well-produced, high-quality meat. And then I think the middle part of the pyramid would be cultivated meat, just because it's so close in experience, but without the downsides. I think it be the middle, and maybe plant-based, which is also progressing rapidly in terms of quality and price, could be the bottom of the pyramid. It's a bit further away in the experience, but it's becoming more and more efficient and higher quality. And I think that there's room for all of them. To actually solve this problem, we need dozens and dozens of solutions. And I'm hopeful that with that, we only need a tiny amount of traditional animal rearing to make it happen.
Yeah. So what I wanted to do, I wanted to wrap up with the last question, and I'm curious. So you've been with Mosa Meat for a longer period. You've been first advisor, now a team member. What would you say are some of the things that you've really noticed or learned in that period that you would like to share?
I was amazed by how much there was support pouring in. So when I joined, the two founders had their email addresses on a web page, but they said, "Well, there's so much incoming requests from press that want to interview or want to come and film at our location. There's investors or people who just say, here's money, go and do this. I want to support this." There were people like me that just got in touch and said, "Can I help with anything?" There's such an outpouring of support that I've been trying to channel it as much as possible, and without overloading the founders, of course. And that's something that shows that people see this as a real solution to an issue, and they're willing to support it, and that was fascinating.
Yeah, I think people really do want the change. They want to make that change happen, but it's just that the option isn't there yet. That's the thing, and I think that's the key to it will be that if it is, as you said, close to or actually the same, it will really sway people's opinions about how you should be feeding yourself in the longer term for meat eating, for example. So Tim, thank you a lot for being my guest. How can people find Mosa Meat on the internet?
There's our website and our social channels. It's mosameat.com. And you'll find links to our social channels too. We'll keep you updated.
Very cool. Thanks again, Tim. It was a pleasure to talk to you.
Thanks so much for having me.
No problem. And for the listeners, you can find the bitsvsbytes podcast on bitsvsbytes.com, and of course on Twitter, Instagram, and LinkedIn. It's all bitsvsbytes. And if you didn't already sign up for the newsletter, you can get 5 things every 2 weeks about technology, leadership, and business. It's on bitsvsbytes.com/newsletter. I would like to thank you for listening. Until next time.